First of all, let's talk about the education system. There is a vast difference in how the European countries and the Australian government perceive education. In Australia, education is one of the highest sources of revenue. In 2019, before the pandemic, the education sector contributed a mind-blowing amount of 37.6 billion to the Australian economy. China, India and Nepal are the three biggest contributors to the education sector of Australia. In the year 2020, the contribution of China was 10.49 billion Australian dollars. India was 6.6 billion Australian dollars and Nepal was 2.97 billion Australian dollars. This tells us that education is one of the major sources of revenue for Australian government. But in Europe, governments invest a lot in the education sector. They take education as an investment rather than source of revenue. That is why in Europe you can find a lot of public universities that offer education for free or very affordable tuition fees as their government is investing in them. European citizens do not need to pay any fees at their school or universities, and it's very cheap for international students too. The reasons for this is the massive amount of investment made by the government. For international students, fees are adjusted in such a way that it only covers the cost of providing the education without any intention of earning profit. In today's video, I'll be talking about how it is to study in Europe versus Australia. Isn't it interesting? I have divided this video into 8 main points and I already covered the first point, which was about the difference in education system. Now I will continue the remaining 7 points that will help you understand whether Australia or Europe is suitable for you for higher education. If you are watching this channel for the first time, I have been making videos about studying abroad. If you are thinking about going abroad for study and seeking genuine information, just subscribe to this channel. I will try to make your study abroad journey as smooth as possible. Now let's move into today's topic. As I already discussed the first difference, the second difference in Australia and Europe is perception of gap year. If you are applying for Australia and have taken a gap year after your high school or bachelor's degree, you have to elaborate on your SOP about what you did in the gap and how it helped your career. But in Europe, the gap between your education does not matter at all. Europeans believe that anyone can learn at any age if he or she wants. That is why in Europe the gap in your education isn't a big issue. But in Australia, if you have taken a gap, you have to give the explanation, and if it is not convincing, your student visa will be rejected. So if you ask me if having a gap in your education impacts your chance of studying in Europe, no, it does not. I have seen many people who did their masters after 8 or 10 years of gap. So if you are planning to study in Europe, you do not have to worry about gap year. Now let's compare the cost of study in Europe and Australia. If you are going to Australia for a diploma, on an average, your yearly fee is 6,000 Australian dollar. If you are doing a bachelor's in college, your annual fee is 7 to 10,000 Australian dollar per year. In university, the fee is 10 to 15,000 Australian dollar per year. Similarly, if you are doing masters in college, your yearly fee is 7 to 10,000 Australian dollar per year, and in university, the fees may range to 15 to 17,000 Australian dollar per year. In Australia, the tuition fee is determined on the basis of credit you want to take. But the scenario is completely different in Europe. In Europe, there are some countries like Germany where you do not need to pay even the tuition fees. In Germany, education is free in almost all public universities for international students. You just have to pay a minimal amount as semester fee. In Austria, you only have to pay around 750 euro as tuition fees. That's it. On the other hand, there are many countries in Europe where tuition fees are really low. In countries like Estonia, Italy, and Poland, you can find subjects that you can study for less than 5,000 euros per year. In Australia, although university and the government provide you with scholarship on the basis of your academic and IELTS score, the requirements are extremely complicated. And for average international student like us, it's very difficult to get scholarships. In comparison to Australia, it is very easy to get a scholarship in Europe. Although we are comparing a single country with many countries of Europe, you can find a large variety of scholarship opportunities throughout Europe. Some scholarship waive your tuition fee, some scholarship waive only a certain percent of your tuition fees. You can also find some scholarship which not only waive your tuition fees but also provide you monthly stipend. That scholarship in Germany, some regional scholarship in Italy, and the Erasmus scholarship provide you monthly stipend in many countries of Europe. Now let's discuss financial requirements. If you are going to study in Australia, you should have at least about 40,000 Australian dollar in your bank account for your tuition and other basic expenditures. Similarly, you have to show different kind of property evaluations before going there. But in Europe, the financial requirements are way more easier than Australia. In countries like Austria and Germany, you have to pay almost nothing in tuition fees. You just have to show the financial proof for living expenses. This amount might range from 5 to 6,000 euros to 8 to 10,000 euros. Depending on which country you are applying to, you have to transfer this amount to your university account. You need not to worry about this because you will get the money in your own bank account. This amount is only taken as a proof that you can bear your living expense there. There are many countries in Europe where both tuition fees and living expense are extremely low. For example, in Poland, you have to pay less than 5,000 euros for tuition fees and living expense. Similarly, in Italy and Estonia, you can easily study for the same amount. In Denmark and Finland, which are termed as expensive countries, you can complete your studies in around 15,000 euros. Now, let's discuss the availability of part-time jobs in two destinations. Recently, after COVID, Australia has made some changes regarding work rights for international students. Until June 2023, there is no restriction on how much you can work in Australia. However, after June 2023, you can only work for 20 hours a week in Australia, which is almost similar in Europe. In Europe, in countries like Finland, you can work for 30 hours per week. In Estonia and Sweden, there are no such restriction on how much you can work in a week as an international student. In most of the other countries in Europe, you can work for 20 hours per week. Talking about income from part-time jobs, I often say that income depends on many factors, so it can't be stated accurately. But for your reference, I will use an average amount. In Australia, you can earn up to 20 Australian dollar per hour. This too varies on the shift you are working and the day you are working. In Europe, wage varies according to the country. In cheap countries like Poland and Estonia, the rate is just 3.5 to 4 euros per hour. In high-earning countries like Denmark, the hourly rate may range up to 150 Danish kroner per hour. Similarly, in Norway, the minimum wage rate is 175 NOK per hour. The best thing in Australia regarding the part-time job is that you only need the English language to get the job. But in Europe, you have to learn the additional language for the country in which you are going to live. If you do not know the native language of the country, it will be very difficult for you to get a part-time job there. Since everyone knows English in Australia, you do not have to learn the additional language, and it's a plus point. I will talk about the language later in this video. Now let's talk about dependent visa. You can take your spouse as a dependent to Australia. For this, you have to show about 55,000 Australian dollar in your bank account for your tuition fees and living expenses. In Europe, Different countries has different rules regarding the requirement to take your spouse with you. For example, in Germany, it's almost impossible to take your family with you if you are going for a bachelor's degree. In Poland, you can take your spouse only after you complete 2 years of staying in Poland. But there are some countries too where you can take dependents easily. For example, in Finland and Norway, you can take dependents with you no matter if you are doing bachelor's or master's. Let's make a rough estimation of the cost incurred while taking the dependent with you. If you want to take your partner to Finland, you have to show that you can spend around 13,000 euro as yearly expenses. Similarly, the amount is 28,000 euro in Norway, and in Denmark, the amount is 20,000 euro. It is not compulsory to spend all this amount, but you have to show it as a proof. Let's talk about one of the most important topic, which is language. As I mentioned earlier, it is hard to get part-time job in Europe without knowing the native language of the country you are living in. Since English is the only language in Australia, you need not to learn any additional language to get the part-time job. In European countries like France and Germany, the native citizens do not like to talk in English. Many of them do not even speak a single word in English. That is why, until you know the native language, it will be very difficult for you to survive there. In addition to this, if you want your children to learn English properly, it is hard in Europe, as most of the countries in Europe do not teach the language. And most of the country, they focus on their own language. But if you are going to Scandinavian, you need not worry much, as priority is given to English language here. In countries like Norway, Denmark, Sweden and Finland, English is commonly used in day-to-day life. So if you are going to these countries, you can rely on English, as people in these countries can understand and speak English. However, learning the native language is always a plus point. The main reason why people prefer Australia, Canada, the UK, USA over Europe is the language barrier. You have to learn an additional language in Europe, so people tend to go to English-speaking countries. Now let's discuss post-study opportunities in Europe and Australia. In Australia, you can take a temporary graduate visa for 1 to 4 years of completing graduation. In between this period, you can do any kind of work. But you have to be clear that for applying this visa, you should have a validity of your IELTS even if you are in Australia. If your IELTS has expired, you should write it again before applying for the visa. Similarly, the next option for you after graduating in Australia is to do your course relevant work. After doing course relevant work for 1 to 2 years, you become eligible for PR. But the work that you are doing must be in the occupation list of the region in which you are working. This means the work that you are doing must be on the list that the government specifies as most required in that region. Only after doing the work that is listed in the occupation list for 1 or 2 years, you become eligible to apply for PR. The PR requirement of Europe is way more straightforward than that of Australia. Generally, after you complete your studies, you will get job seeking visa for 1 to 2 years. And after getting degree relevant job in job seeking visa, you can apply for work permit. After being in work permit for certain years, you have to learn language, and after passing the language, you can apply for PR. You don't need to do IELTS to get PR in Europe, but you have to pass the language exam. In Europe, the criteria for work permit mainly depends on salary and the relevancy of your work with your study. Every country's immigration policy mentions the salary requirement for getting a work permit. Only after completing the requirements can you apply for a work permit. In most of the countries, it is stated that after completing your studies, you should find your study-relevant job to get a work permit. However, there are some countries where you can do any kind of work after completing your studies and still apply for work permit. For example, in Finland, it is not compulsory to do your study relevant work to get work permit after completing your study. You can easily apply for work permit after meeting salary requirements. And after living for 4 years on work permit, you can apply for permanent residency in Finland. Due to this reason, Finland is known as one of the easiest countries to get work permit and PR in Europe. Finally, in my personal opinion, if you do not have strong financial situation but you want to take a quality education abroad, Europe will be the perfect destination for you. But if you have strong financial situation and do not want to take the stress of learning an additional language, then Australia is a perfect fit for you. Before making a decision, you should consider many points. I told you about some of the points in this video and I request you to do proper research yourself. If I have missed any other points in this video, please mention them in the comment below. I will pin the comments so that the other viewers of this video could get more perspective. The main motive of this channel is to convey knowledge among all of us. I hope today's video gave you some information regarding condition of Australia and Europe for international students. Next week, I will be back with a new topic. Thank you for watching me till the end. We will surely meet next week. Thank you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.